The only problem that I have with that also personally is that like RPE, like you'd be surprised how much you can lie to yourself, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you tell, like, for example, one thing that I'm trying to test at the moment is durability. And the way I try to do that is I do, for example, 3 5-minute repeats at the start of a session. So like warm up, 3 5-minute repeats at a specific RPE. And then I go for a longer run, maybe 3 hours or so, and then do 2 or 3 same repetitions in the same place at supposedly the same RPE at the end of the session.
Yeah.
And the problem I found is that actually when I went to do my 2 repetitions at the end, one was severely lower than what I did at the
Yeah.
start, and one was severely higher. So clearly they were
Okay.
not the same intensities
Yeah.
between
No.
the two.
No.
And when I looked at the data, so just pure heart rate, all 5 in between the like the 3 at the start and the 2 at the end, all had kind of similar heart rate. They were all within 1 beat per minute. So clearly,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
I agree. Heart rate is a bad or a poor metric to judge what I'm doing there. And this is where kind of I keep finding a difficulty with trying to quantify or wanting an objective measure of intensity. One thing that I'm actually looking at, and we talked a bit about it through email, is the potential of using breathing rate here or respiration rate. Few people have talked about it till now. It's been maybe used a bit in cycling, but I know that you've had some experience using breathing as a kind of metric of intensity. Can
Yeah.
you describe it maybe a bit, and like what you found there, and in what context you tested it? Again, mainly for my own sake, because I will be looking into it over the next few weeks.
Yeah. So the entire breathing rate concept I learned from my dad, I have to say, because he was the one who introduced me to Timeware, the company that he has worked closely with for the last 3-4 years and helped them as a physiologist, not on the engineering side, but purely from the physiological perspective, create a wearable monitoring device that can capture ventilation and breathing rate specifically in the field. So they started with the shirt that measured the expansion of the chest wall, and now they have a chest strap similar to a heart rate sensor or heart rate chest strap that measures the expansion of the chest during exercise through a very sensitive stretch sensor. So you get the frequency of breathing. So how many breaths you take per minute. So the reason why this can be useful is because first of all, it is a measure of physiological stress, so your internal stress response during training. The same is heart rate, but heart rate, as you know, has a defined max, and it will often approach like a steady state during both low intensity exercise, but also in the threshold and slightly higher intensity zones or during intervals. Whereas breathing will actually continue to increase throughout a session because it captures your perceived effort or perceived exertion. So by using the percentage of heart rate reserve and percentage of breathing rate reserve, you can get what Stephen has termed this mobilization index. So you can see how these two parameters drift differently during a session, and when they approach each other, you know that you are pretty much cooked. When these two approach the same percentage of heart rate and breathing rate reserve. So using those two together can in a good way capture both physiological and perceptual stress at the same time. But also, breathing is so much more dynamic than heart rate. There is a delay in heart rate response when you, for example, increase the pace very quickly, or in terrain, mountains with up and down hills, the heart rate may stay pretty steady, so you don't really get that dynamic nature of the exercise, whereas breathing, it will respond more acute and dynamic to exactly what you're doing. So I found it very interesting to use breathing more when it comes to, for example, high rocks training, where heart rate isn't really a good tool because of the different modalities and periods of anaerobic work, and then not rest, but exercises that have a lower oxygen demand, for example, and this very much so up and down nature or intermittent nature of the exercise. Same in cross-country skiing, for example. But we haven't had a good way of measuring breathing in the field until now. I've used TimeWare in my master's project, where I did this double threshold study. And based on some validation studies or studies that I did in the lab during this project, it seems that the TimeWare sensor is reliable and accurate enough to use in the field during normal training. But it, of course, depends on how you use it. And, for example, talking during will, of course, influence how you breathe. How tight the sensor is will affect the data, etc. So you have to use it correctly for it to give good data in return. But for example, for trail running, if it's a tool that can be used and it's stress tested over time, I think it's a very, very useful tool in those types of situations.